On February 3, 1946, in the city of Riga, Latvia, a crowd of thousands gathered in the bitter winter cold. They had come to watch a man die. Not just any man, a man who had personally overseen the murder of over 100,000 human beings. Women, children, elderly, shot into ditches, buried alive, machine-gunned in forests, while their killers ate lunch afterward. His name was Friedrich Jeckeln. And here is the detail that will stay with you long after you finish watching this. He didn't just give orders. He personally designed the killing method. He called it the sardine packing method. He was proud of it. He wrote about it in reports like an engineer describing an efficient production line. But this story is not simply about a monster. It is about how ordinary ambition, political loyalty, and institutional obedience transform a former World War I soldier into one of the most prolific mass murderers in human history. It is about Babi Yar, Rumbula, Kamianets-Podilskyi, names that most people cannot even pronounce today, places where entire Jewish communities ceased to exist within 48 hours. How does a human being become this? What did the survivors see? And what happened at that public hanging in Riga that no history textbook fully captures? The answers are more disturbing than you expect. The Making of a Killer, 1895 to 1941. Friedrich Jeckeln was not born a monster. He was born on February 2, 1895, in Hornburg, a quiet German town in Lower Saxony. His father was a factory worker. His childhood was unremarkable. His neighbors were unremarkable. Everything about his early life suggested a man who would live, work, and die in complete obscurity. But Germany in the early 20th century was not a stable place to grow up. By 1914, Jeckeln was 19 years old when World War I exploded across Europe. He enlisted immediately. He fought in the trenches. He watched friends die in mud. He survived poison gas attacks. By the time the war ended in November 1918, he had earned the Iron Cross twice. He was decorated. He was proud. And then Germany surrendered. That surrender broke something inside an entire generation of German men. The humiliation of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, the economic collapse, the hyperinflation of the 1920s, where a single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. These were not just political events. They were psychological earthquakes. And Jeckeln, like millions of others, was looking for someone to blame. He found his answer in the Nazi Party. Jeckeln joined the NSDAP, the Nazi Party, in 1929. Then in 1930, he joined the SS. And here is where his story accelerates dangerously fast. Because the SS was not simply a military organization. It was an ideological brotherhood built on racial obsession, total obedience, and the absolute belief that Germanic people were destined to rule, and that Jewish people, Roma, Slavs, and others were obstacles to be removed. Jeckeln was an enthusiastic believer, not a reluctant follower, an enthusiast. By 1936, he had risen to SS Gruppenführer. By 1941, he was one of the most powerful SS commanders in the entire Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, personally trusted him. That trust would have consequences beyond imagination. Then on June 22, 1941, everything changed. Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Over 3 million German soldiers crossed the eastern border in a single morning. It was the largest military invasion in human history. And behind the frontline soldiers came the Einsatzgruppen, mobile SS killing units. Their job was not to fight armies. Their job was to eliminate civilians, Jewish communities, political commissars, anyone deemed a threat to Nazi racial ideology. Jeckeln was appointed higher SS and police leader for Russia South. He commanded tens of thousands of men across Ukraine and the occupied Soviet territories. He had weapons. He had authority. He had Himmler's complete backing. But here is what made Jeckeln uniquely terrifying among even this group of killers. He was not satisfied with simply following orders. He innovated. He looked at the existing killing methods and decided they were inefficient, too slow, too wasteful of ammunition. So he invented something worse. He called it sardine packing. Victims were forced to lie face down in layers inside mass graves. each layer of bodies arranged in the opposite direction to maximize the number of people that fit. Then they were shot. Then the next layer climbed in. He submitted this method to Himmler as a formal operational improvement. Himmler approved it and ordered it replicated across the entire Eastern Front. The summer of 1941 was just beginning. The worst was still ahead. Kamianets-Podilskyi, August 27th, 28th, 1941, the first massacre. August 1941. Ukraine is burning. In the summer of 1941, Hungary deported approximately 23,600 Jewish men, women, children, and elderly across the border into German-occupied Ukraine, pushed out and abandoned. What awaited them in the medieval fortress town of Kamianets-Podilskyi would shock even senior Nazi commanders in its scale. History was about to record one of the earliest mass atrocities of the Holocaust. They arrived with nothing. No food, no shelter, no language to navigate what was happening to them. And Friedrich Jeckeln was waiting with direct authorization from Himmler himself. The order used clinical language: eliminate the deportees before they become a logistical burden. Over 23,000 human beings reduced in a single sentence to an administrative inconvenience. On August 27, 1941, Jeckel's SS units, Police Regiment Self, and local auxiliary forces assembled the victims under the lie of resettlement, told they were being moved somewhere better. Some believed it, some didn't. None had anywhere to run. They were marched to ravines and anti-tank ditches outside the city. Then, Jeckeln's sardine-packing method was deployed for the first time at massive scale. Victims were forced to undress, forced to lie in the ditches in organized rows, then shot. Then, the next group climbed down. By August 28, 1941, in just 48 hours, approximately 23,600 people were dead. 23,600 people in 2 days. To put that in context, that is larger than the entire population of many European towns today. Wiped out completely in the time it takes most people to get through a long weekend. And here is the detail that historians keep returning to. Jeckeln didn't disappear into a command tent. Eyewitness testimony from his own men, later recovered during Soviet investigations and Nuremberg trial preparations, confirmed that Jeckeln was present at the killing sites, watching, supervising, correcting technique. This was not bureaucratic distance. This was personal participation. Kamianets-Podilskyi became the first Holocaust massacre to exceed 10,000 victims in a single operation, a threshold that marked the moment Nazi genocide shifted from targeted killings into systematic industrial-scale slaughter. When the reports reached Himmler, his response wasn't horror, it was satisfaction. He approved the model, promoted it, and communicated to SS commanders across occupied territory that this was the standard to replicate. A massacre that should have been a breaking point became a template. Jeckeln had passed the test. Himmler now knew what this man was willing to do, and more importantly, how efficiently he was willing to do it. That approval was the most dangerous thing that could have happened, because 1 month later, Jeckeln turned his attention north, to a ravine on the outskirts of Kyiv, a place called Babi Yar, and what happened there would become one of the defining atrocities of the entire 20th century. Babi Yar and the Sardine Method, September, November, 1941. On September 29, 1941, tens of thousands of Kyiv's Jewish residents walked through the city streets carrying their belongings, elderly men, mothers with infants, children gripping their parents' hands, responding to notices that threatened death for anyone who didn't appear. They moved in long columns toward the northwestern edge of the city, toward a ravine called Babi Yar, Old Woman's Gully. What happened there over the following 2 days would become one of the single largest massacres of the entire Holocaust. What happened over the next 36 hours represents one of the single largest mass shootings in the entire history of human conflict. As the crowds arrived, German SS troops and Police Battalion 45 took control. Documents were confiscated, valuables were taken, people were forced to undress in the cold September air. Then they were pushed in groups toward the ravine's edge. Jeckeln's method was mechanical in its brutality. Victims forced down into the ravine, made to lie across the bodies of those already killed, SS shooters moving along the rows with single shots to the back of the skull. Then, the next group brought down, and the next. In 2 days, 33,771 men, women and children were murdered at Babi Yar. The ravine itself became the grave. By September 30th, 1941, in 36 hours, 33,771 people had been murdered. That number is from the official German operational report, signed, filed, submitted to Berlin as a routine operational update. 33,771 people recorded like inventory. What separates Babi Yar from so many other massacres is that a handful of people survived to tell the world what happened. Dina Pranikida, a puppet theater actress, jumped into the ravine before the bullets reached her and lay motionless under the bodies of the dead for hours. After dark, she crawled out, covered in blood, and escaped through German lines. At the 1946 Kyiv war crimes trial, she delivered one of the most important eyewitness accounts in Holocaust history. What historians remember most is what she described last, that after the shooting stopped, the ravine continued to make sounds. Now, Jeckeln didn't pause after Babi Yar. By November 30th, 1941, he oversaw the Rumbula massacre outside Riga. Approximately 25,000 Latvian Jews were marched through freezing forests to prepared pits. The operation ran over 2 days, November 30th and December 8th. In those 2 days, Rumbula became the third largest Holocaust massacre ever recorded. A survivor named Friedrich Jeckeln survived by falling and pretending to be dead beneath bodies in temperatures below freezing. She lay there for hours. Her account, published decades later, described hearing children calling for their mothers after the shooting had stopped. By December 1941, Friedrich Jeckeln had personally overseen the murder of over 100,000 people in approximately 100 days. 100,000 lives, 100 days, and the world, at that moment, had almost no idea it was happening. The machinery behind the man, how historians reconstructed it. Here is something that should disturb you deeply. Friedrich Jeckeln almost got away with it. Not because the evidence didn't exist, but because Nazi forces spent the final months of the war burning, shredding, and burying operational records. They knew what was coming, but they made a critical mistake. The same obsessive bureaucratic culture that made the Holocaust possible, the culture of filing reports, signing orders, recording numbers, had produced so many copies across so many offices that complete destruction was impossible. Documents survived and captured Wehrmacht headquarters, local administrative buildings across Ukraine and Belarus, and the personal files of mid-level officers who never imagined they'd lose. When Soviet forces swept westward between 1943 and 1945, their intelligence units followed directly behind the front lines to collect exactly these documents. The paper trail the SS thought they destroyed was already in enemy hands. This is where the reconstruction of Jeckel's crimes truly begins. Soviet investigators had been building the case against Jeckel since 1943. Operational reports, signed authorization documents, radio communications with Himmler, kill tallies formatted like routine supply requests. The evidence was overwhelming, but it sat locked in Soviet archives for nearly 50 years, inaccessible to Western historians during the Cold War. It wasn't until the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s that researchers from Germany, Israel, Latvia, and the United States finally saw what Moscow and Riga had been holding all along. What they found was staggering. Jeckeln's operational reports weren't vague, they were meticulously detailed, listing dates, locations, victim counts broken down by age and gender, ammunition expenditure, and commanding officers present. He wasn't concealing what he was doing. He was reporting it upward with professional pride. Survivor testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation corroborated everything. People who had never met, living in different countries, describing the same commands, the same procedures, the same sounds. But the most chilling source of all was Jeckeln himself. Captured by Soviet forces in May 1945, he talked extensively, confirming massacres, confirming methods, confirming Himmler's personal approval, naming names. The Soviet interrogators recorded every word. Those transcripts survived, and they would be read aloud at his trial, in his own words. The net close, 1944 to 1945. Jeckeln's final months. By 1944, the Eastern Front that had given Jeckeln his killing rounds was collapsing. Stalingrad had fallen in February 1943. Soviet forces were pushing westward, retaking Kyiv, Riga, and Minsk, one by one. Jeckeln, the man who had murdered over 100,000 civilians, was now a desperate military commander trying to hold a disintegrating front line. By January 1945, Soviet forces had penetrated deep into Latvia. Jeckeln commanded the 6th SS Corps in Courland, a narrow strip of western Latvia, where approximately 200,000 German soldiers had been encircled since October 1944. He knew the end was coming. What's remarkable is that he didn't flee. He didn't escape by sea like other commanders did. Historians suggest he genuinely believed his military record might protect him from his SS crimes in Soviet eyes. That was perhaps the greatest miscalculation of his life. On May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrendered, Jeckeln personally surrendered in full SS uniform. He was 50 years old. Within hours, Smersh had identified exactly who they had. 7 months of intensive interrogation followed in Moscow, and Jeckeln cooperated extensively. He confirmed Kamianets-Podilskyi, Babi Yar and Rumbula. He described the sardine packing method in technical detail: efficiency, ammunition conservation, faster completion. He confirmed direct verbal orders from Himmler in August 1941 to accelerate killings. His confessions matched the documentary evidence almost perfectly. Then Jeckeln made an unexpected request. He asked to write a personal statement, not a legal defense, but a message to the German people, urging them to reject Nazism and describing the Holocaust as a crime. Whether it was genuine remorse, survival strategy, or Soviet-coached propaganda, historians still disagree. What is agreed upon is that Soviet authorities broadcast and published it for propaganda purposes. 6 weeks later, he stood in a courtroom in Riga, and the city he had turned into a killing ground was about to deliver its verdict. The public hanging and what it means, February 3, 1946. January 26, 1946. Riga, Latvia. The trial lasted 3 days. For crimes spanning 3 years and over 100,000 murders, Jeckeln's own confessions were entered as evidence. His defense was following orders. The tribunal rejected it immediately. On January 29, 1946, he was sentenced to death. The Soviets made a deliberate choice. The execution would happen publicly, in the center of Riga, in the city where he had orchestrated the murder of an entire Jewish community. On February 3, 1946, in below freezing temperatures at Victory Square, between 30,000 and 100,000 people gathered. Jeckeln was brought out in his SS uniform, insignia stripped. At approximately 1 p.m., the executions were carried out simultaneously. The crowd was silent, not celebratory, silent. People expected relief, closure. Instead, witnesses described something closer to emptiness, because Jeckeln's death returned no one, rebuilt nothing, restored not one community, erased from existence. Of approximately 3,000 Einsatzgruppen members who participated in mass shootings across Eastern Europe, fewer than 100 were ever prosecuted. Most lived out their lives in West Germany. Some became businessmen. Some became civil servants. The sardine-packing method Jeckeln submitted to Himmler with professional pride was replicated across the entire Eastern Front. One man's innovation, hundreds of thousands of additional victims. The most uncomfortable truth about Friedrich Jeckeln is not about him. It is about the system that needed him, promoted him, rewarded him, and then produced dozens exactly like him across an entire continent. The system that made him, that question remains everyone's responsibility to answer. Because history does not end with the hanging, it ends with what we choose to do with the memory.